Well, the time's come to take a look at Isaiah chapter 5. That's where we are today. Go on our website if you haven't already and download our PDF. And hopefully you've read the chapter. 30 verses to cover today. Hopefully summarize a little bit better than yesterday. We're going to be talking about a vineyard. And no, it is not the same vineyard as Song of Solomon, although the first verse kind of sounds like it could be pulled from Song of Solomon. Let's take a look at our first section. Our first two sections here are going to be pretty much the same as yesterday. Our timeline, we're looking at the beginning of Isaiah's ministry, and we have the time window there from 740 to 680 BC. And our key characters are also going to remain the same. The speaker here is Isaiah. He's prophesying the words of God, words of judgment against the citizens of Judah and the citizens of Jerusalem. We do have a good variety of words to define today. The first one is wine vat in verse 2. This is a large container for storing and aging grape juice after the harvest. We have a bath. Now, not like a bath you clean yourself in. This is in verse 10. This is a unit of measure. A bath was equivalent to approximately 6 gallons or 22 liters. And then another unit of measure, a homer, in verse 10 as well. A homer is equivalent to 58 gallons or 220 liters. And then we have the term Sheol. If you were with us for the book of Psalms, you'll be pretty familiar with this word. I use a definition by Albert Barnes. It's somewhat of a tricky word to define, but I think his definition does a pretty good job. Quote, the idea which was conveyed by the word Sheol or Hades was not properly a grave or sepulchre, but that dark, unknown state, including the grave, which constituted the dominions of the dead. So generally the way this is used is talking about where people go after they die. So now let's go over to page number 2 and take a look at our outline. We're going to start off talking about that vineyard in verses 1 through 7, the vineyard of the Lord. The chapter begins with a parable about a vineyard. A parable is like the general definition is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, a heavenly application. So a parable about a vineyard. There's this loving farmer who plants this vineyard on a very fertile piece of land, and he does everything that he can to make sure that the vineyard is going to flourish and produce good fruit. But when the harvest comes, the vineyard produces bad fruit called wild grapes instead of the good grapes that were intended by the farmer and that he was hoping to get that would have been good for things like juice and eating. The wild grapes were bitter and essentially useless. And this parable, in the parable, the vineyard is supposed to represent Judah, God's people. God loved them. He made every provision for them. He had taken care of them for hundreds of years, and yet they produced nothing but evil and bad fruit. So in response, God was going to do to Judah what a farmer would do with a vineyard that only produced bad fruit. He's going to tear down the wall, and he's going to let animals come in and devour it and trample it down. So God was going to leave Judah exposed to external threats and deprive the nation of the care that he had given it for so long. God had been looking to Judah to produce fruits of righteousness and justice, but they had nothing to offer him except the fruits of crying and bloodshed, according to verse 7. Our second section will take us through the end of the chapter. It's verses 8 through 30, God's woes on Judah. God starts off condemning a number of groups of people, evil people in Judah. So he starts by condemning greedy property buyers who bought up all the land and left other people with nothing. And he promised that he was going to make their land unfruitful and he was going to cause their harvest to fail because of what they had done. God condemned drunkards and partiers who loved their wine and their instruments and their reveling, but didn't have any love for God. He condemned those who called good evil and evil good, and he condemned those who perverted justice for bribes. Now, there are many people in Judah who kind of mocked the idea that they were ever going to be judged for their wickedness. They mocked the idea that God was going to do anything about their actions, but of course, they were wrong. What a sorry little vineyard Judah had become, and God promises that he's going to withdraw his protection from it. In fact, he says that he's going to use other nations. He says that he's going to whistle for or summon other nations, and he's going to empower them to punish Judah, and they are going to become his force of discipline in verses 26 through 30. This is something that we're going to talk about throughout the book of Isaiah. God is going to use other nations to punish his people. And it shows us God's sovereignty over all of the nations and how he uses them in real historical events to bring judgments on people for wickedness. And all these things that we're going to talk about are things that you can look up in your history book. So it shows us how God is orchestrating all of these things to accomplish his will. These aren't just random, historical things that happen because men want them to happen, but also There's a level to it where it's actually the will of God, and in some cases the justice of God motivating these nations to go to war with another or to conquer another or something like that. So history is not just secular, God's hands are all over it. Judah was going to be taken into exile, that's mentioned very briefly. The proud men of Judah were going to be shamed, and God was going to be exalted. And Judah's fate would inform all the rest of the nations that you can't disrespect God's holy name and get away with it. So that's going to be our breakdown of chapter 5. Let's talk about an application. I thought, I was reading a commentary, and I thought Charles Spurgeon had a good thought-provoking comment about the parable of the vineyard in the first part of this chapter. He says, quote, "I have been thinking of the advantages of my own position towards the Lord, and lamenting with great shamefacedness that I am not bringing forth such fruit to him as my position demands. Considering our privileges, advantages, and opportunities, I fear that many of us have need to feel great searchings of the heart." The vineyard of Judah had great privileges, but it produced nothing of value. We need to be thinking about the privileges that God has given to us. How are we using them? What fruit are we producing? If God has blessed us abundantly, don't you think that he has the right then to expect something? Are you living in a way that would return anything to the Lord? Judah took all of God's blessings and squandered them. They were just concerned with basically enjoying their own lives and living the way that they wanted to. Don't let that be your life story when someone writes a summary of what you did with your time and all the good things that God gave you. That's our study for today. Hopefully I'll be seeing you tomorrow as we cover a very important chapter, chapter 6.